So do you have any words of advice for our current students?
When you put into perspective that in a couple years from now, when you graduate and you get that job, you're not going to be sitting at your desk dwelling on the fact that you got a D on your Calc 3 exam. I constantly tell my students about the time I got a 20% on my abstract algebra final, and I'm still sitting here teaching them how to do everything.
Greetings. Welcome to Eric's Angle, the podcast for Iowa State mathematics students. I am your host, Eric Weber, chair of the mathematics department. Today's guest is Sully Fitzgerald, a 2023 graduate of our program earning bachelor's degrees in mathematics and secondary education. While a student here at Iowa State, Sully founded the Late Skate Club, was involved in the Salt Company and the International Friendship Connection. He was recognized for his academic achievement by the deans of both the College of Human Sciences and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Sully is now the upper-level mathematics teacher at Ankeny Christian Academy, where he is teaching geometry, trigonometry, and calculus. Please welcome Sully Fitzgerald.
Hi, Sully. Thanks for appearing on Eric's Angle.
Hey, good to be here.
So let's start off with you introducing yourself to our audience.
Okay, great. My name is Sully Fitzgerald. I'm a recent Iowa State graduate. I graduated in December of 24, so pretty recent here. I graduated with a degree in mathematics as well as a degree in secondary education. And I'm using that to be the high school math teacher at a small private school in Ankeny. And I'm teaching upper level math to all of my high school students.
So tell us about how you ended up studying math and becoming a teacher.
Yeah, so my whole life I had wanted to go to Iowa State, and I had always been interested in the idea of engineering. So I'm from Des Moines. In my senior year, I committed to go to DMAC to study pre-engineering and get an idea of what it's like to be an engineer, and then transfer to Iowa State because I couldn't afford tuition right off the bat. So I went to DMAC. I enrolled in Calc 1 and Classical Physics 1, and Calc 1 was difficult, but I was getting an A and I was understanding it and I was enjoying it. Classical physics, I enjoyed the material, but I didn't understand it fully. And my professor was very unreasonable often in his grading policies and his teaching policies. So I ended up dropping out of physics, even though I liked learning about physics, and realizing that, okay, if I have to do this for the rest of my career, I'm not going to succeed in engineering. But if I could do math, then maybe I can find something to do with math. So I thought about what I could do with math, and I knew I could be a financier, or I could be an actuary, or I could do 100 different things that pay really well. But I knew that I personally didn't want that work environment. I wanted more interaction with people, and particularly the opportunity to mentor and teach. So I thought about being a teacher, and I decided to get a job at Mathnasium in Ankeny, where I tutored math to all from kindergarten through high school. I had to teach complements of 10 to one student, and then I turned around and did ACT prep with another student. So I had the wide range of math skills and learned how to hone them and practice and teach them. And that was the most rewarding job I've ever had. So I committed after that to be a teacher. And Shortly after I did that, I realized that UNI is probably the school I need to go to because that's where you go to be a teacher. So I took a tour of UNI. I met with some of the professors that went there and I loved it. And I was about ready to commit to go. And then I realized that I've always wanted to be a Cyclone. I still could be a Cyclone. And everything is lining up for me to be a Cyclone. I can't find a place to live in Cedar Falls to go to UNI. I can't find any people to live with. I don't know anybody there. But Iowa State, my brother is currently attending there at the time. I know 200 people from my high school that go there, and Ames is only 40 minutes away from my house. So I committed to go to Iowa State, and my sophomore year was my first year at Iowa State, and I was enrolled in Calc 3 at the time and Intro to Proofs, and that was my first big boy math classes. And I realized that, okay, this is going to take some effort, but it's really rewarding, and I really love it.
Big boy math class.
Mm-hmm.
I like that description. I remember when I was studying math in college or even grad school, people would ask me, so are you in like calculus 452 or something like that? And
Mm-hmm.
that's not how it works. It's not calculus.
Nope.
Right?
Yeah. I love when my students would always ask me, what's the highest level of math? I'm like, well, there's not really a highest level. I had to take an arithmetic-based course called differential equations, and some people call that Calc 4. And after that, all of my classes were theoretical. So maybe differential equations, but then my theoretical classes were much more difficult for me. So fundamentals of analysis and abstract algebra were much harder than DiffEq, in my opinion. So when students ask me that, I'm also like, there's not really a highest math class, there's not really a highest math theory because you can do number theory, you can do graph theory, and it's whatever works easiest for you is whatever you're going to have an easier time in,
Yes, there is no limit to mathematics. It's unlimited.
Yeah, definitely.
And you liked these theoretical classes even though they were harder for you?
Yes, my favorite was non-Euclidean geometry. It was any geometry that I really liked. Euclidean. Professor Mayhook was Dr. Mayhook was my professor, and I really enjoyed him in class. And I really liked just proving geometry because in high school I didn't like geometry. I didn't get it, and I didn't do well in it. But now we take those ideas and we get to prove them and we explain why everything is the way it is, something that I was missing in high school. So it was the same concepts, but we really dive into why they work and we prove them all to work. So I loved that. And then when we look at non-Euclidean geometry, or how I call my students, geometry that doesn't make sense in the real world. But even then, I'm like, well, sometimes it does. But mind-breaking geometry, I like to say too. It's just so cool to learn about. And just the hyperbolic plane, how a triangle has a maximum area of pi, and like that's wild. That doesn't make sense in our real world that we live in. Like I can draw a triangle with a bigger area than that. But it's just really cool how we redefine a given branch of math through the axioms and the postulates, and we say, okay, if these are the rules, how would our universe work? I thought that was so fascinating.
So you said something about not understanding like in high school, but then learning about it in college. And I'm wondering about your experience now as a teacher on the other side of the teacher-student interaction. What's your experience?
Yeah, so I think that my least favorite thing in teaching is that I don't get unlimited time to fully explain everything. I teach geometry right now as one of my classes, and there have been so many theorems that we talk about. My students don't even know what a theorem is. let alone why theorems are the way they work. When I was in high school, I didn't know why Pythagorean theorem worked. I didn't know why all these congruency postulates worked. I just knew that they did because my teacher said so. So that was the thing I wanted to avoid as a teacher. I wanted to make my students almost annoyed by how much this makes sense and by how many different ways I can explain why this works. I had students literally roll their eyes because I said, I'm sorry, I don't have enough resources in the curriculum to prove this for you. We have to move on with our curriculum. And they were like, oh, what do you mean you can't prove it? Or like, you don't have to prove it to us. We just accept it. We know it's true. I'm like, well, you should never do that. You should never just accept something because I tell you. You should always be able to prove it. And you can prove it. But we have to move forward in our curriculum. We have too many things we need to accomplish. So every once in a while, I'll go through a lesson a little quicker just so I can show them the proof. And most of the time, they don't really care. But a couple of my students, I can see it that they're registering that and they're thinking, okay, this is valid. There's a reason for all of this. This all makes total sense. And I love that. And usually those are my students that are maybe underperforming because they don't fully understand something. But then when we prove, or when I show fully thought out, this is why it works, then I see the level of understanding really kicks up and I see grades improve.
Yeah, that's always nice when you can see in your students the understanding, or you can see the light bulb go on. That's always very satisfying.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite thing.
Yeah. So you were telling me a little bit before about your experience, a similar experience in your Algebra 2 class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I got to share, we had about a couple days in between breaks where we had a short week. And I'm like, I don't want to spend one of the days, it was a 3-day week, I think. I don't want to spend one of the days doing review, another day doing lesson, and then the next day doing a quiz. Instead, I want to just save that for when we have a full week and we can fully thought out. Instead, we're going to take this week and learn about Pascal's triangle, which they haven't learned about. Or if they did, none of them knew what it was. So we learned about Pascal's triangle. That's a really easy concept. So took a couple of minutes to explain. And then I said, okay, great. Now on a piece of paper, go down and do the 10th row and write out what they should all be. And they all just wrote it all out, the triangle in its entirety. And then I said, now stop completely what you're doing. Because what we were doing prior was factoring. And I said, now I have a polynomial, or just a binomial. I have a binomial and it's to the degree of 7. And I can tell you what every term is going to be without thinking twice. And I did it. And they're like, how do you know all that? And I pointed to Pascal's triangle. I pointed to the 7th row. I didn't have to say a thing. I just pointed to it. And they all went, no way. I'm like, yeah, but maybe it's a fluke. Maybe I just got lucky. So I said, let's do it to the 8th. And I had them do it. And sure enough, it worked out. And they were like, okay, that's crazy. I'm like, yeah, that's insane. Two things that seem to have nothing in common, but yet have a lot in common. And then we looked at the concept of binomial coefficients, which is something that comes up at the end of the year in my Algebra 2 curriculum, which prior teachers have not been able to get to because they run out of time. And I said, this is too cool of a thing to skip. So I took a lesson plan that I had actually made in one of my classes, in my disciplinary literacy class, that was about this concept. I took that lesson and adjusted it, and I gave that lesson to my students. And I told my old professor, I'm like, hey, I just gave this lesson. Here are the results. And she thought that was really fascinating. But I told them about how if you have, I used the musician Logic. I used Logic's album covers. And I said, here are 10 of his album covers. How can I pick 3 of them? I just want my 3 favorites. How many different favorites could I have? And I gave them Lego pieces to represent that. And they would try to pick different ones and see how many they could do. And I'm like, okay, we can figure this out, right? We can try it all day long and count up how many things we have. But then I said, now I have 20 and I want to choose 15 of them. How many can I do? And they started doing the approach of just plug and chug, how many different ways can I do it, rearranging everything. And they realized after about 30 seconds that it's going to take quite a while. And I said, there's got to be an easier way for this. And then we did a little bit of the lesson, and then we encountered the formula. And the formula works just fine. It's awesome. It uses factorials, which they had been very briefly shown. So they're like, okay, this is cool. I'm like, you know what's cooler? Let's go back to Pascal's triangle. And we said, if we want 10, choose 5. I go to the 10th row, the 5th input, and sure enough, that's the number. And they were like, are you kidding me? I'm like, I am not kidding you. If you don't believe me, pick another number. And they did it, and it worked every time. And I think that was one of the coolest experiences I've had as a teacher, even though it's been a short time. And I think my students agree that they really liked it. I only had one student that didn't like it because all of her other classes were study halls, and she just wanted to have a study hall. And I said, nope, we're not having a study hall. We're learning cool math today. She was rolling her eyes, but yeah, it was awesome.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's fun if you can blow their mind like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so rewarding.
Yeah.
I wish teachers did that to me when I was in high school,
So do you have any words of advice for our current students?
I would say I had a lot of worryful nights about my math classes. I think specifically linear algebra and abstract algebra were the two classes that probably caused me the most concern because they were very difficult for me at the time. And I was really scared that I wasn't going to pass these classes. But I had friends in the classes who were also scared of the same thing. And what I found is that even if you, I like to think of the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario as a first semester junior at Iowa State is I don't pass linear algebra and I have to retake it next semester. Oh no. Okay. So what? I think that I often find myself worrying needlessly, especially about classes, because our system at Iowa State is not designed for you to fail. It is designed to challenge you, though. So if you're feeling challenged and you're feeling stretched a little thin, that's the goal. Their goal is not to stretch you so thin that you snap. So if that is occurring, then something wrong is happening. And I think that when you put into perspective that in a couple of years from now, when you graduate and you get that job, you're not going to be sitting at your desk dwelling on the fact that you got a D on your Calc 3 exam. I constantly tell my students about the time I got a 20% on my abstract algebra final. And I'm still sitting here teaching them how to do everything. We're students and we don't always do as well as we hope, but the goal is to learn. And if we're learning, then we are doing it right. And I think that no matter what we do, if we keep progressing towards that goal of graduation, it's really hard to not attain it if you're not putting forth the effort.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice, right? We want our students to be resilient and persevere. And of course, as you said, we definitely want them to learn. So
right.
I'm glad you had those experiences as a student at Iowa State University.
Right. So am I.
Well, Sully, I think that's probably a good place to end. So I want to thank you again for appearing on Eric's Angle.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.